Today, we're going to be speaking with Steve Kaufmann, who's a former Canadian diplomat and business executive who's spent the last 16 years learning languages and encouraging others to do so with his YouTube channel Lingo Steve and lingq.com, an app that he co-founded. It's really great to talk to you. I appreciate you being on.
Glad to be here.
So, okay, I mean, let's orient the audience a little bit. You speak about 20 languages, is that correct?
Right. Let's say a dozen or so that I could easily get into a conversation and hold up my end, and another, eight or so that I'm in various stages of having forgotten or learning, but have put a lot of effort into.
So there are all of these kind of conventional wisdoms about language learning, including after a certain age, the ability to learn a language in a way that would be close to native becomes dramatically diminished. Oftentimes people talk about age 10, 11, or 12 or something like that. Another idea about the best way to learn languages, whether it's by immersion or with certain types of programs or whatever the case may be. What can we definitively say about language learning abilities in humans?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I think the goal of learning to speak like a native, in other words, to be indistinguishable from a native, is very difficult
Yeah.
past the age of, say, 10, 11. We've all experienced, I mean, if you have an immigrant in the US or Canada that came before the age of 12, very likely they'll end up speaking like a native. If they arrive after the age of 20, they'll speak very, very well. They may have a large vocabulary. They may express themselves better than natives, but you will always detect a little something there that gives them away. So the goal isn't to speak like a native, in my case.
Sure. Yeah. And in fact, many people don't know that I am not a native English speaker. I actually learned English. I mean,
Okay,
I kind of am. I learned English at age 6 when I moved to the United States from Argentina.
right,
Can
right.
you talk a little bit about in terms of the techniques you've found effective for learning new languages? What are they?
Right. So the language has to come from outside. So you can't begin speaking. You have to listen a lot. We listen as children. I came from Sweden at the age of 5. You hear other people speaking, you pick up on it. Eventually, you start imitating it. You start speaking with mistakes, and eventually, you make fewer mistakes. So, to me, input is the key. Lots of listening and reading. And at some point, the brain has gotten used to the language now and wants to output, wants to say things. And we'll say them wrong, but eventually we'll start saying them right. And it's not because other people correct them. We start to hear it better and better. We become aware of our own shortcomings or gaps, and we self-correct. Sure, you can correct, it has some input. So to that extent, traditional language instruction, which focuses on getting you to speak early and speak correctly early, has it backwards. You have to begin by exposing yourself to a lot of the language in situations that are meaningful to you, and gradually you will get better and you'll speak more. And as you speak more, you'll speak better. But it's not that instruction is bad, or grammar instruction, but it's not necessary.
There are I don't want to call them gimmicks, but there are lots of
Right.
programs that are predicated on the idea of if you can first learn to hear and learn and practice saying sort of like 20 relatively common words and phrases, and then expand that to like 100. And that will kind of really place you not only in terms of vocabulary in some of the most commonly used words, but the syntax of the grammar of a language. That's one of the best ways to start, by taking those specific phrases and words and looking at that first in whatever language you're trying to learn. Does that sound like a reasonable technique to you?
Not at all.
Mm.
But I saw where I can't remember his name, but he had the 4 hours work week or something, and he was saying once you deconstruct the language, you understand how it works. I don't believe that because, first of all, anything you learn in the language, you're going to forget. So if you learn them all, a certain 20 phrases, you're going to keep on forgetting them
Mm.
anyway. Those very common words and phrases are going to come up if you're listening and reading and allowing your brain to get used to the language. The very common words and phrases are going to come up. You can't sort of isolate them and learn them. You have to learn them as part of allowing your brain to get used to the language. Um, some of the sort of structural aspects, okay, the verb comes at the end. That's going to become pretty obvious to you. You're
Mm.
going to get used to it. And the idea of learning a few phrases, I mean, I've tried it. When I say I went to a country where I didn't speak the language, like Vietnam, I got a phrase book. I tried to learn the phrases. Hopeless. You just can't. It's a gradual process of absorbing. It's kind of like a snowball getting larger and larger as it rolls down the hill. You can't just isolate a few things and learn them. I don't believe that.
It would seem intuitive and obvious that languages that are more similar to those that we speak are the easiest to learn. I mean, for example, I my French is pretty okay, and I could tell when I was in French class in high school that I had a much easier time because I spoke Spanish. So much of French is similar to Spanish. When I go to Italy or Portugal, I can just speak Spanish to a lot of people and they speak their language to me. We understand each other because the languages are similar. On the other hand, I've tried to learn Hebrew and it's extraordinarily difficult. It's a different alphabet. It's written from right to left. The syntax
Right.
of the grammar is completely different. Is that always the case? Just that the closer the
Always.
language is to what you speak, the easier it is?
Always the case. The biggest issue in learning languages is words, vocabulary. So if you're going from Spanish to Portuguese, you've got 95% of the vocabulary. With French, you got 90%, or whatever the number is.
Yeah.
English to Spanish, you got 50% of the vocabulary because of the common Latin origin of so much vocabulary. So common vocabulary is the biggest. Because language learning is about learning words. If we have a lot of words, the brain starts to figure out how the language works, but it's the words that we need to have. The other thing is writing system. Obviously, if it's written in the Latin alphabet, I mean, I've learned, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, Persian now, Hebrew. I tried. I mean, Korean, where the writing system is different, it's a lot more difficult because everything is habit, and we're so used to reading in our own alphabet. And even if we understand how the symbols work in Hebrew, um, until our brain really gets used to reading in that language, it takes you got to read millions of words.
Mm.
So yes, similarity of vocabulary, and obviously the same writing system. Going to make it a lot easier.
Are there objectively more difficult languages to learn, regardless from what language you're coming from? In other words, I think like one question would be, if you speak English, what are the easiest languages to learn?
All
That's
right.
one question. But another question would be, are there just objectively more difficult languages?
Well, I'll give you a good example. For an English speaker, as I am, I find Slavic languages complicated in their
Mm.
grammar. But if you are a speaker if you're a Polish speaker and you want to learn, Ukrainian, it's not difficult because you're already used to that. So the issue is how different are the patterns and the words of that language compared to languages you already know. Uh, to me, that's to try to say, okay, I mean, right now I'm learning Persian and Arabic. Arabic is more, and so they're both foreign to me. Arabic is more complicated. Arabic is more difficult. It's
Huh.
objectively more difficult than Persian. But it might be because Persian is an Indo-European language, which Arabic is not. They both use the same writing system.
Is
So
it
some language, sorry,
No,
yeah,
no, I was going to say when you start with a different writing system like those, do you
right.
go directly to the written language or do you not even worry about that initially and just start with listening to it and trying to speak?
Well, I always start listening, and when I listen, I can't understand. Obviously, it's just noise. So then I start reading. But I read small amounts. In the case of Arabic and Persian, I go straight into the writing system. With Chinese, where the writing system is not phonetic, then I did spend sort of 1 month listening and reading in a phonetic, pinyin or the sort of romanization of the Chinese, so that when I went to start learning the characters, at least I had some sense of the language and the words. But that's the only case where I've done that. Otherwise, I go straight in. If it's a phonetic script, Korean, Japanese to some extent, and certainly Arabic and Persian, I know up front that it's going to take me a long time to get used to it. So
Mm.
I look at very short, like on Link, we have the ability to look at sentence by sentence. So I'll listen to the sentence. I look at it. I read it. I don't remember what that symbol is. I look up the symbol. I read it again. Everything about language learning is what seems initially impossible. You'll never get there. You'll never understand. If you just keep on putting in the time, you eventually get there. So, Persian and Arabic, at first it's just noise and a bunch of squigglies. But if you just stay with it, the brain, you got to trust your brain. You got to trust your brain. Your brain will get used to it.
I don't know how much you know about how language is taught in the United States in general in middle school and high school, but one of the things I've observed is that many of the people who take a few years of a second language in the United States don't really come out speaking very much at all. And some of the things I observed in my high school, for example, with the Spanish teachers was many of them were not only non-native speakers, they weren't even really fluent. They spoke with very poor accents, and grammatically it was like 90% of the way there. So that seems to me like a recipe for disaster. If the person teaching doesn't speak that well, it's going to be hard to learn. But can you comment a little bit about how language is taught to middle and high schoolers, and whether it's being done the right way or not?
Well, and even a worse example is the English school system in Canada,
Mm.
where kids have have French for, let's say, 10 years and can't speak.
Ah,
And the thing is that, first of all, motivation and the attitude of the learner is so important. So the most important thing for the teacher is to be able to motivate the learner. We don't need the teacher to become the model of the language, particularly today. There's so much stuff out there. There's Netflix and YouTube and podcasts and radio and TV. We don't need the teacher to be the model of the language, but the teacher has to motivate the learner. You don't even really need the teacher to teach the grammar. You can look it up. If I want to know the conjugation of a verb in Spanish, I can look it up if I'm curious, if I'm motivated. So the key thing is motivation. And that's where the way languages are taught typically is quite demotivating, because you're taught some rules of grammar, you're tested on it, you get it wrong. Getting things wrong is not very motivating. If you can spend the time listening to things of interest to you, reading, getting the language in you, more students will learn to speak. Well, some students don't want to learn, but it's the whole idea is, can you increase the number of people who are motivated enough to learn that they will actually go out and learn?
last thing I want to ask you
That's the way I
about,
see it.
very anecdotally, I'm
Yeah.
curious whether there is a linguistic or societal explanation for why some folks seem to be almost like predisposed to better learn some languages like English. And I'll give you an example. I've
Hmm.
This is very anecdotal, and I'm going to you for you to
Right.
tell me it's only anecdotal or there's something to it. I've met a number of folks from the Philippines when I was in France, when I was in the UK, who spoke English as though they were Native American individuals. And they told me,
Right.
I've never even been to the United States. I learned English merely by watching American films and television shows and kind of teaching
Right.
myself. And to me, they sounded like Native American English speakers. Is there something,
Right.
for example, about the Filipino language or the people that might predispose them to be better at learning English? Is there something to that?
I don't think so. I mean, we have a lot of Filipino immigrants here in Vancouver, and a lot of them speak with a noticeable accent, which they never get rid of.
Mm,
It's rather the access to American TV programs. If you go to Sweden, everyone speaks English. It's not because they teach English better in their schools. It's because all television programs are in the original version. So
mm.
they watch lots of American and British television. It's kind of natural to them. That's almost part of the culture they grow up with. So again, it comes back to input. If you're an English-speaking Canadian in Vancouver, you never watch anything in French, unless you're going to the French immersion program. The school system is not going to do much
Right.
for you. They're going to teach you a bunch of rules. You won't have anything at the end of it. So it all comes back to input. I mean, and people do learn who aren't in the country. When they on television watching these, I'm amazed at these Ukrainians, that are on TV a lot, and they're being interviewed, and their English is unbelievable,
Yeah.
and they haven't been living in the States. So if a person is motivated, if a person spends time listening to the language, reading in the language, that's much more important than any classroom activity.
We've been speaking with Steve Kaufmann. You can find his YouTube channel at Lingo Steve, and also the language learning app that he co-founded at lingq.com. That's LINGQ.com. Steve, such a pleasure
Right.
having you on today. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
I could talk forever on languages.